It is a dark night. The waves of the sea crash against one another, creating a terrifying roar. Thick clouds cover the sky, lightning flickers here and there. The wind is so cold it feels as though it cuts through the skin. Amidst this eerie silence and deafening storm, a long ship appears, made of wood, yet astonishingly strong. On its prow, the carved head of a dragon snarls outward, frightening even in the darkness. Inside the ship, a fire burns, and around it sit warriors, their eyes glowing with a single dream: plunder, glory, and honor. Draped in sheepskin, holding sharp axes in their hands, long swords strapped to their waists, their faces reveal the scars of many battles, the endurance of bitter winters. Their gaze is fixed on a distant shore where they believe wealth, power, and fame await them. These were the Vikings. But the Vikings were not merely raiders. Behind them was an entire civilization, a culture that grew in lands of ice-capped mountains and freezing seas, a society that believed in mighty gods. Their greatest god was Odin, god of wisdom and war. They said Odin watched every battle, deciding who was worthy of entering Valhalla, the paradise where brave warriors lived eternally, feasting on meat, drinking mead, and fighting glorious battles forever. You may wonder, why did these men leave their homes to risk the raging seas? The answer lies in their homeland, Scandinavia, what is now Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Harsh lands, little fertile soil, bitter winters, and hunger knocking at every door. Farming was difficult, survival demanded new resources, and so they turned the seas into their roads, setting sail for the far corners of the world. Yet they were not just fighters. They were storytellers too. At night, they sat around the fire, telling their children tales of gods and heroes. Small boys would touch their father's sword, dreaming of the day they too would board a longship and conquer distant lands. Women were not confined only to homes. They worked in trade, in farming, and at times even took up the sword. These were the Vikings. To Europe, they were a symbol of fear, but their story was not only about bloodshed, it was also about hunger and hope, adventure and dreams, war and belief. And this story has only just begun. The true identity of the Vikings lay in their ships. These were not just pieces of wood, they were their very souls. The great warships, called Drakkar, bore dragon heads on their prows. When they cut across the waves, it seemed as though some giant beast was tearing through the waters. These ships were unique, both light and strong. They could withstand the storms of the open seas, yet their shallow design allowed them to sail up rivers. This is why the Vikings could suddenly appear in the very heart of towns and cities. By the time villagers awoke, their doors had already been smashed down. One day in 793 CE, history itself changed. Off the coast of England lay a small island, Lindisfarne, home to a monastery. Monks prayed inside, bells rang, birds chirped, and peace filled the air. But suddenly, through the fog, Viking ships emerged. With shields pounding, voices roaring, they stormed ashore. In moments, the monastery was ablaze. Monks were dragged away as captives, treasure looted. And it all happened so swiftly that no one could resist. This marked the first tremor of terror in Europe. The church declared them soldiers of the devil. Villagers barred their doors at night, but still slept in fear, wondering when these northern raiders would descend upon them. But remember, the Vikings were not only killers, they were also traitors. On their ships, sometimes swords and shields, but other times silks, furs, and precious metals. They sailed down Russian rivers all the way to the east. They reached Baghdad, where Muslim traders encountered them. Chroniclers wrote of tall, broad, golden-haired men speaking strange tongues. They sold slaves and furs, and in exchange bought gold, silver, and fine cloth. Think of it. In an age when even traveling from one village to the next was considered arduous, these men crossed thousands of stormy miles to new lands. This boldness made them both unique and terrifying, but no empire lasts forever. By the 11th century, the Viking Age began to fade. The very storm that had once terrified Europe slowly calmed into silence. The reasons were many. Europe had changed. Kings and rulers, once weak and divided, grew stronger. They built stone castles, raised standing armies, and fortified towns. No longer could Viking longships simply sail up rivers and burn villages unchecked. The element of surprise was gone. Another force was Christianity. Missionaries came north, carrying the cross instead of the sword. At first the Vikings resisted, but slowly the new faith spread. Some converted willingly, others for political alliances, and many by force. With baptism came change. The old gods, Odin with his one eye, Thor with his hammer, Freya with her beauty, faded into myths. Wooden idols were burned, churches were razed, and crosses stood tall in the land of the north. But this change was not only religious, it was cultural. Where once honor was measured by the number of raids and treasures won, now it was measured by loyalty to a king and the laws of the land. The fierce independence of the Viking warrior gave way to feudal duties. The longship, once the heart of their identity, was replaced by farmland, trade, and stability. Yet decline did not mean disappearance. The Vikings left behind more than fear. They had carved new identities into Europe. In France, their settlement of Normandy became powerful. From there, William the Conqueror, descendant of Viking blood, invaded England in 1066 and forever changed its history. In Russia, their descendants, the Rus, laid the foundation for great kingdoms that would grow for centuries. In the Mediterranean, the Varangian Guard, Viking mercenaries, protected Byzantine emperors as the most trusted of soldiers. Even in England, where Viking raids once brought terror, traces of their culture endured. Words of their language slipped into English: sky, window, egg, knife, husband. Customs, laws, and traditions remained long after the last Viking longship had sailed. And across the Atlantic, the memory of Leif Erikson lived on. Though his voyages were forgotten for centuries, we now know he and his crew set foot in North America 500 years before Columbus. That daring spirit, the urge to go beyond the horizon, was the true Viking legacy. Imagine for a moment the final scene. A Viking warrior, old now, his beard white, his sword hung on the wall. He sits before the fire, telling his grandchildren the tales of raids, of storms, of victories, of gods who once ruled the skies. The children listen wide-eyed, their world already changed, but the stories keep the past alive. And as the fire burns low, he whispers the final truth of his people. We are sons of the sea. Empires rise, empires fall, but the sea never dies. As long as the waves crash, the spirit of the Vikings will live on. Their saga ended, but their shadow still lingers over history. Their blood runs in millions today. Their language shapes our speech. Their courage inspires explorers, and their myths still ignite the imagination of storytellers. The Viking Age may have closed, but the legend of the Northmen never will. The year was 793. On the windswept coast of Lindisfarne, monastery bells rang softly, calling monks to prayer. Yet far out at sea, another sound stirred, a rhythm of oars cutting through water, sails swelling with the wind. Carved dragon heads glared from the prows of longships. The Vikings had arrived. They came like a storm. Doors shattered beneath axes, walls crumbled, and flames devoured the sky. For the first time, Europe saw what waited beyond the horizon, warriors who lived by the sword, carrying with them both terror and awe. But this was only the beginning. In the fjords of Scandinavia, hammers rang against iron. Farmers left plows for swords, fishermen traded nets for shields. In every young man surged not just blood, but fire, honor, glory, and the promise of Valhalla. When their ships set sail, even the ocean seemed to bend to their will. With every raid their hunger grew, for silver, for slaves, for conquest. Their storm spread far and wide. Eastward they carved paths through Slavic lands, reaching the mighty gates of Constantinople. Westward, England and Ireland felt their fury. Kingdoms like Northumbria, Mercia, and Wessex trembled at the sight of black sails on the horizon. For kings, no news was more dreadful than this. The Northmen have come. Yet with time, the Vikings did more than raid. They began to settle. In England, they claimed vast lands under the name Danelaw. In Ireland, Dublin rose as a Viking stronghold. In France, land was granted to them that became Normandy, the land of the Northmen. From there, their descendants would one day reshape Europe again. Their power was not brute force alone. Their longships, swift and shallow, slipped silently into rivers where no one expected them. Behind strong walls, townsfolk never imagined danger drifting so close. To avoid slaughter, kings and peasants alike paid Danegeld, silver tribute to buy peace. But the Vikings were more than raiders. They were traders too. In their markets you could find Arabic coins, Byzantine silks, Persian glass, and Frankish wine. The same man who swung an axe one day could bargain with a smile the next. From this age sprang legends still told today, Ragnar Lothbrok, who brought kingdoms to their knees. Bjorn Ironside, who sailed as far as the Mediterranean. Ivar the Boneless, who conquered with cunning as much as with steel. Their stories became more than history. They became sagas. Every tale painted a vivid picture. A young warrior leaving his village to chase glory. A monk whispering prayers as fire consumed his church. A king lowering his crown as he handed silver to the very men who threatened his throne. A child born in a new city where raiders had become rulers. The Vikings believed gods watched their every move. Odin, who sacrificed his eye for wisdom. Thor, who ruled the storm and thunder. Freya, where love and war entwined. To them, a sword was not merely steel. It was destiny, part of a divine story written long before they set sail. This was not a passing storm. It was a force reshaping the world. This was the age when kings trembled, when walls fell, and when the voice of the North echoed across the world. This was the rise of the Vikings. The Vikings were not only raiders, they were explorers, traders, and settlers. Their longships carried them farther than anyone of their age dared to dream. Picture the long North Sea horizon at dawn. Dozens of sleek longships rise and fall on the waves, their sails catching the wind like wings of great birds. Each prow carved into dragons and serpents, not just for decoration, but to strike fear into the unknown. They left the icy fjords of Norway and Denmark and sailed into the heart of Europe. Along the rivers, they reached deep into France and Germany. The Seine, the Rhine, the Volga. No river was safe from the dragon ships. But they did not always come for blood. Many came for trade. Furs, amber, walrus ivory, and slaves were carried south, and in return, they brought back silver, silk, and spices from lands the Norse had never known. Their reach stretched eastward. Across the Baltic, they sailed into the rivers of what is now Russia. There they became not just raiders, but rulers. The people called them the Rus, from which the name Russia itself was born. Cities like Novgorod and Kiev grew from Viking settlements, mixing Norse courage with Slavic traditions. But the spirit of the Vikings was never content to remain in one place. They turned their ships west into the vast Atlantic. First, they settled the green coasts of Ireland, leaving behind towns like Dublin that still stand today. Then their sails carried them farther, to the rugged coasts of Scotland, the windswept isles of Orkney and Shetland, and beyond to the Faroe Islands. Their hunger for land pushed them into harsher worlds. Iceland, cold, volcanic, wild, became a thriving Viking home. Here they built farms, raised families, and created the sagas, the epic tales that still echo with their spirit. And from Iceland, one step further, Greenland, a land of ice and danger, yet still claimed by their courage. But the most daring voyage of all came around the year 1000. Led by Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, they crossed even the mighty Atlantic Ocean. Their longships touched the shores of North America, in a place they called Vinland. They saw forests and grapes, wild lands filled with promise. 5 centuries before Columbus, the Vikings had already set foot in the New World. Though their colonies did not last, their daring proved their legacy. No horizon was too far. And yet, exploration was not only about conquest. In the Mediterranean, Viking warriors became mercenaries in the service of the Byzantine Empire. They stood as the Varangian Guard, the most trusted bodyguards of emperors. Their axes, once feared in northern villages, now defended the throne of Constantinople itself. Think for a moment of what this meant. Men who were born in wooden halls lit by fire now walked the marble palaces of the East. Warriors raised in snow and pine forests now marched beneath golden mosaics and domes that glittered in the sun. The Vikings were no longer just raiders of the north. They were citizens of the world. From Newfoundland to Byzantium, from the frozen edge of Greenland to the warm markets of Baghdad, their presence was felt. The Vikings were not bound by maps. They drew their own. They were not afraid of the unknown. They sought it. Their greatest conquest was not of land or kingdoms, but of distance itself. They proved that the world was larger than anyone had dared to believe. And in their sails, they carried a truth that still defines humanity, the desire to see what lies beyond the horizon.